Hello, everyone. I hope your week is off to a good start. We are going to talk about surveys today. I probably shouldn't say that this is my favorite research method, but I definitely enjoy collecting survey data. I enjoy putting together a survey, designing it, and I hope that you will enjoy my lecture today. So I'm pretty sure that at least that you have completed at least one survey in your life. So what do you consider to be a survey? When somebody asks you, could you please complete my survey? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it that you need to respond to serious and boring questions? Is it that you're not really willing to share your opinion this way? Or is there something else? What are some of the first things that would come to your mind? What are your concerns and how do you perceive a survey? Let's take a look at what this method is about. A survey represents a series of formative questions that are delivered to a defined sample of people. And when we distribute these questionnaires to the people, we're actually expecting of them to answer the questions and to return the survey to us. A survey includes an introduction. So at the beginning of the survey, you are explaining what kind of research data you're collecting, what the survey is about. You also want to explain certain concepts so the people can understand what is it that they're engaging with. And a questionnaire is a part of survey. It contains specific set of questions that respondents are asked to answer. What are some advantages and disadvantages of this research method? Why is it that we decide to conduct a survey? Major advantages are that this research method could be performed at a relatively low cost. So for example, if you would like to survey PACE students about their opinions or attitudes toward remote learning, you could simply randomly select participants and distribute a questionnaire to them using Qualtrics. So this is a platform that allows us to design questions and then simply distribute that survey to PACE students and then collect data from them and analyze that data. So you don't see in that case any cost involved. Of course, if you want to collect data from a wider population in order to generalize that data, that could cost you because you might consider paying people, let's say sending them in an envelope $5 just to motivate them to fill out the survey. Or you need to buy a sample, a generalizable sample, and to distribute that survey to them and collect data. Another advantage is this relatively fast delivery. So in the example that I mentioned, you basically can just use Qualtrics to design a survey and then send the link to a certain number of PACE students. So you can deliver this survey fast and you can also collect data fast. This data could be exported into SPSS. It is a statistical software where you can automatically see your data and you can actually start cleaning your cleaning data. You should start doing data cleaning and then simply analyze that data and be able to answer your research questions based on the data collected. Another important element of a survey, and this is where they basically differ from experiments, it is easier to research and you're able to research large populations. You can distribute your survey to a number of people and collect data from them. Surveys, how can you collect data? You could use multiple methods. You could collect data over the phone or mail or the internet or mobile phone, for instance. But there are also certain disadvantages when it comes to survey methods. So one of such disadvantages as is that surveys are limited to scaled or checklist questions. We're gonna cover them soon. There is no control over response rate. So you can send survey questionnaire to 2,000 people and perhaps receive answers from only 100. So response rates could be really low. Another problem is that another disadvantages is in providing information more than understanding. So it supplies us, survey data supplies us with information about people's attitudes or people's beliefs, but we don't really, it doesn't mean that we're going to have a general understanding of the causes of such attitudes and beliefs. Another problem is this increasing public resistance. So people simply are reluctant to fill out surveys, or they're reluctant to share their data because they believe they're being such data could be collected for something else other than what the researcher states. And of course, there are difficulties to explore certain issues in depth. You're not having this direct communication with people where you could learn more details about their attitudes or beliefs. You just receive this data. You just receive information that you could analyze, and you could of course draw conclusions, but there is no in-depth analysis based on the data that you have collected. Another thing when it comes to surveys, so what are questions? Like, what kind of questions are you going to ask when you're setting up a survey? What is it that surveys could assess? So the first thing, we ask demographic questions. So I said this is the first thing, but we actually want to end a survey with demographic questions. When we're setting up a survey, demographic questions should be at the end of the survey, not at the beginning, because we don't want to bother people with demographic questions at the beginning. We want to make sure that we're asking some engaging questions that would make them complete the survey, and then we simply leave this easy demographic questions for the end of the survey. Demographic questions that we could assess include age, sex, religion, marital status, and their occupation or income. Some things that we could assess with survey include knowledge, attitudes, and behavior. So we could test their knowledge using this research method. We could assess their attitudes and their behavior, like how many times a week do you go to the gym? So this is what we could do with survey research. What are some types of surveys that are common? There are different surveys. So one of them is cross-sectional surveys. Basically, this type of survey allows us to see what is going on at one point in time. We survey people today or 5 days later. We want to see their attitudes toward a particular product. In case of trend survey, we measure the same items over time, but we just try to draw different samples from the population each time. So we're going to take a look at this sample and measure their attitude toward let's say, using TikTok. So that is trending now, and we could assess that. Another thing that we could do, we could assess their attitudes toward TikTok by using a different sample and asking them the same questions. When it comes to panel surveys, in this case, a group of individuals is sampled and they're retained to answer questions over time. So we're asking the same group of people questions over time. So one of the issues with panels is that people could die in the meantime, or perhaps some of them would just drop out of the study, and this could pose some challenges to this type of surveys. Cohort is very popular. It basically means surveying the same type of people over time. We could survey millennials, or we could survey Generation Z, or we could survey baby boomers over time. And finally, cross-legged survey. What does this mean? It is different from all other types of surveys because this is the only survey that could assess causality. So we want to assess cause and effect, and what we usually use to assess cause and effect are experiments, but this is only one type of survey that can assess this relationship. When it comes to survey, we usually assess correlation. We can't assess causality, but there's just one type of survey that allows us to do that, and that is cross-legged survey. It measures a dependent and independent variable at 2 points of time. So for example, you could assess a group of people and children and expose them to ask them to you could actually survey a group of people and see whether they are video game playing habits. And then in 30 years or 20 years, you assess the same group of people again and test whether they have predisposition to violence. So you're basically posing that because they engage in this video games, they have this predisposition to violence in the future. What are some types of questions that we could ask? And this is really important because you will be putting together a survey and you need to know what kind of questions you could ask. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, your demographic questions should be at the end of the survey. And what kind of questions could you ask? You could ask open-ended questions such as my age is, but another type of an open-ended question is, let's say, you ask people to explain what are some reasons for using social media other than the reasons that you listed. So you could list reasons such as killing time, entertaining myself, and so on, connecting with people. But then you could, if you feel like that the list that you created when you ask such question is not is not exhaustive, then you could just ask them an open-ended question like, what are other reasons why you use social media? So that is an open-ended question, and such a question could produce qualitative data. So when we design a survey, we primarily deal with quantitative data, but if we feel that we should ask some open-ended question and elicit answers that we never anticipated, then we could also add some that could be our qualitative portion of a survey. In this case, with the open-ended question in this slide, it will result in this is a quantitative question. Even though we're asking an open-ended question, it is quantitative because the person responding is asked to say what their age is. So they're going to type in a number. Other types of questions are dichotomous questions. These questions ask users, respondents, to provide an answer based on two choices that they have. Have you read the book? Yes or no. So they only have, they are only asked to select one of the two options listed, yes or no. Multiple choice questions ask users to check what they believe applies to their perception or their attitudes. So they have several options and they're supposed to select one option. Class should be held at 5, 6, or 7 a.m. What do you think? Multiple choice are mutually exclusive. So an example is that people are not supposed to, so it also in case of at what time should this class be held. So they need to select one question. They need to select one answer, not multiple. And these answers should be mutually exclusive. So it's 5, 6, 7. In this case, 1924, 25, 29, 30, 34. So they select one of these categories. And as I'm looking at this specific question, my age at last birthday was, what do you think, what kind of data are we dealing here with, ratio or interval? Take a look at it and think. It's interval. We are providing categories and there are equal distances between these categories, 19 to 24, 25 to 29, 30 to 34. So there are equal distances. And if we list, for instance, 19, 20, 21, 22, then we're dealing with ratio level data. Other types of questions, you're frequently asked to fill out a survey where you're supposed to rank order something from 1 to 5 or from 1 to 10. And one such example is, my ideal partner should be a rich, good-looking, powerful, intelligent. So what is your priority? Is rich number 1 or good-looking number 1, powerful number 2, intelligent 3, or is intelligent number 1, and so on. So you basically rank order these attributes. Another type, this is what we have covered already. And I want to reflect on the Likert scale again, because they're critical in assessing attitudes or people's behavior, people's perception of certain issues. Why? Because this allows us to measure their attitudes. We ask several questions to assess some phenomena, such as people's attitudes toward politics, certain political parties, or people attitudes toward social media, or people attitudes toward certain news channels, and so on. So we ask multiple questions to assess how they feel about it. One such example includes, let's say, your attitudes towards hybrid vehicles. You feel they're powerful, they reduce dependency on foreign oil, and so on. Strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. So these are the options. You basically list a bunch of statements on one side and then ask people to express their level of agreement with each statement. So you start with strongly disagree and then with strongly agree. But also another type of Likert scale could be to just list items, and then on the other hand, it doesn't need to be strongly, their answers do not need to range from strongly disagree to strongly agree. They could range, for example, from not important at all to extremely important. So it is just like important for people to express their opinion about to what extent they agree or to what extent something is important to them. And with small samples, you would use a 5-point Likert type scale. With a larger sample, you could use a 7-point or a 10-point scale. Another type of scale, and we touched upon this before as well, is the semantic differential scale. Basically, respondents, I always use this term, respondents are asked to state to their agreement on one side or the other. Do they feel that Model 3 Tesla car is good looking or ugly? So if they think that it's really good looking, they would mark this area, or if they're neutral, their answer will be in the middle. Do they feel they're powerful, weak, expensive, or cheap? So we have kind of two extremes, and then people decide whether they're on one side or the other. If they think it's ugly, but not extremely ugly, their answer would be here. What are some of the problems when it comes to posing survey questions? And I want you to pay attention, because I have an exercise for you, and I also want to make sure that you are going to design a very solid survey that you can use and collect interesting data through that survey. One of the things that you need to avoid by all means is posing leading questions. Such a question could be, when did you first start plagiarizing your research papers? So don't ask such questions. Don't lead people to their answer. Don't make people, or do you think that um, this grocery store is not clean enough? So you're already posing some opinion to them. So you really need to think of not asking these leading questions. Double-barreled questions. So this is when you're basically asking two questions in one to express, or you're asking people to express opinions about two things. Such an example includes, does your university have dorms for males and females? So you're asking two questions in one. Or another example of a double-barreled questions, which question could be, do you drink and smoke? So maybe you drink, but you don't smoke, or maybe you smoke, but you don't drink. So you're not sure whether to respond yes or no to that question. Another thing that you want to avoid is negative wording. Such an example includes a course in communication research should not be required as part of the communication major. And the double negative, will you vote against the building demolition, or aren't you going to vote? So it is really confusing and people are not sure how to respond to such questions. Another problem is with mutually exclusive and exhaustive items. If you see a survey that does this, which option does describes your age group? Under 18, 18, or 25? 25 to 35. So somebody who is 18, they're not sure whether they're supposed to circle under 18 or this category. Somebody who is 25 is not sure whether to circle number 2 or number 3. Another problem is that when you don't provide categories that are mutually exhaustive, one such example is, what is your class standing? Freshman, sophomore, senior, graduate student. What is missing here? Junior. Yes. So this is not, so what happens if if somebody who is a junior gets your survey, so they don't have like an answer listed there reflects their class standing, so they are not sure what to do. And this could basically discourage people from completing the survey because they don't want to circle something that doesn't reflect their attitudes or beliefs or whatever. So you really need to make sure that you're providing a list of answers that is mutually exhaustive. Finally, you should think about the order of questions. One way to start a survey is funnel. That means you will ask some broad questions and then progress to specific questions. Inverted funnel is the opposite way. You will start with a specific question and progress to more general questions. And how are you going to collect data for your survey? What are some ways to survey people? You could survey them face to face. This could be very time consuming and exhausting, but one good thing about face-to-face surveys is that if there's something that is not clear in your survey, you'll have a chance to further explain it to your respondents. You could interact with them and you can ensure that they're receiving clarification for each question that you're asking, if necessary, of course. Mail surveys, they've been popular for such a long period of time because we could collect responses from a general population. And one problem with these surveys is also reflected in low response rates. So people would just receive a survey in their mailbox and throw it away because they don't want to bother. answering questions and so on. So it could be really problematic to collect responses this way, but the great thing is that you could really collect responses from a generalizable sample. Some even say that if there are low rates of that you could receive, there are low response rates from a mail survey, it could still be more beneficial than collecting data over the internet, because you are going to get responses from a more diverse population. Telephone survey, you basically call people and ask them questions. And this is a good way to survey people, but the problem is also, just like with face-to-face communication, how honest will people be? Will they respond to a phone survey? So they could kind of change their answers because they're embarrassed to share certain information. Let's say you ask them questions about their drinking habits and they feel embarrassed to say that they drink, they have 5 drinks a week. So instead they say, well, I have a drink or two a week. So these are some problems when you're communicating with people, when you're, even though you could the benefit is that you could clarify every question that is not clear to them. The problem is that people might not provide honest answers. But this is actually one of the disadvantages with surveys in general, that people could lie and just provide answers that don't really reflect what their attitudes and beliefs and habits. And this is less likely to be the case with anonymous surveys, which is why such surveys could be basically conducted and distributed online or over mobile phones, mobile apps. And anonymity is very important because anonymity increases chances of people to provide honest responses to surveys. Online surveys, this is what I usually do because it is very difficult to find a population that from which you could generalize data. So many times I would, even though I understand the importance of collecting data that could be generalizable, such as collecting data over mail surveys, online surveys are still very beneficial. You could learn a lot from them. So you basically create a survey in Qualtrics, and or you could use any other web platform to design a survey, and then you find ways to distribute that survey. When I was distributing a survey for one of the research studies that I conducted, I distributed it online in various ways. I just distributed it through social media, or I distributed it to the people I knew and asked them to share it further, and so on. Mobile surveys, you could create a survey and ask people to complete it over the phone. And one of the problems with this type of surveys, basically, people are not really if people don't see questions well, or if it's not, even though mobile phones are convenient, perhaps they're not really convenient to completing a survey on them. So these are just some of the ways. So if you think of your way to collect survey data, you could think of this online method, but you also need to figure out which platform you're going to use to distribute your survey. What is your target group? If you're doing a study on Facebook and you want to make sure that you're collecting data from the people using Facebook, then you should be distributing that survey over Facebook. The problem with response rate, so that is the biggest problem when it comes to survey, how to convince people to respond to your survey. When it comes to, one of the things that you could do is send a letter in advance, tell people that you're collecting data and that their responses are very important, like you really want to assess their attitudes. You could send an advance letter, or you could send an email or call them over the phone to let them know about the survey. Then, of course, after sending them out the survey, you could send a reminder letter, email them, or make a phone call. One of the things that is important if you're doing a mail survey, you really need to, and you're expecting of your respondents to reply, to actually send you back the survey they completed. You need to make sure to send them a paid envelope that they could use to mail you back. It is very important, and incentives work well too, such as sending $5. Some people would send $5 right away, or some people would say when you complete the survey, well, we will send you $5. A small gifts or donation to charity could also help. And of course, it is important to send a follow-up stating that you're really grateful that they completed your service. Just send a thank you note. Now let's take a look at the key concepts of today's lecture. One difference: surveys basically incorporate a questionnaire. People usually use this as a synonym, but when we talk about surveys, we are actually also thinking about this entire instrument, from the way you formulate your explanation of the survey, asking people to accept to participate in a study, or what we call informed consent. The questionnaire is basically just a set of questions that you're gonna provide inside a survey. So survey starts with some explanation, informed consent, and then there is a questionnaire. So survey is like a wider concept than a questionnaire. Surveys capture demographics, knowledge, attitudes, and behavior. There are several types of surveys. Those include cross-sectional, trend panel, cohort, or cross-like survey. We're likely to use a Likert or semantic differential scale in our survey to measure attitudes or people's perceptions of certain issues. Some of the ways to collect data include face-to-face surveying, phone, mail, mobile, and online data collection. Now that we discussed this research method, I want you to download the file survey exercise. And this exercise includes a list of questions. I want you to find errors in the survey I posted and explain these errors. You need to do this for each question and then post your answers on their surveys. This is my reference for today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, any thoughts that you would like to share, please send me an email or post your question under questions in class. Thank you very much and have a good week.